Hi everyone, it is Vian from Mountain Road Ride here, and today we are going to talk about this bike setup that you see next to me. Now, if you've been following along with some of my previous posts, you will know that a couple of weeks back I did a video on a not so successful bike experiment where I tried to take this trusty old road bike and turn it into a bit more of a time trial specific setup. So I mentioned back then that I will be converting it back to the original bike with the road components on there, and that is what you see next to me. However, there's one new addition to this particular setup, and it's this nice set of carbon wheels, the 1150mm carbon wheel set that you see up on the bike right now. Now, this is also not a brand new wheel set for me. If you go back in my history, I have done a full review on this particular wheel set, and you'll actually be surprised that I didn't pay too much for this wheel set. A little bit more about that later. Now, once I got this wheel set back on my bike, it's been a while since I've had it on the bike. Throughout the off-season, the winter season, I did not have this particular set on the bike. I in fact had the original stock wheel set on the bike. But when I swapped back to this carbon wheel set, I just instantly felt like I was going a little bit quicker. There was that bit of perception that I could just go ever so slightly quicker on this wheel set when compared to the stock wheel set. Now, one thing that I do want to mention is that I am not excluding the fact that this wheel set might very well be quicker than the stock wheel set that I have substituted it out for. I mean, obviously it has some additional aerodynamic benefits like a deeper wheel set. But what I want to talk about today is in fact the perception that when a wheel set like this is placed on my bike, I immediately feel like I can just go quicker. I mean, I just look at it. It just, from the beauty of this wheel set alone, it just creates that feeling that I look faster, therefore I feel faster, and who knows, it might just translate to actually being faster. And so that is what we're going to talk about today, is that placebo effect that we so often find with cycling, where when we fit a new piece of gear to our bikes, it's so easy to just gain, or at least feel that we've gained an additional performance from that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in today's video. So I'm going to get kitted out and we're going to get out on the road, and I'm going to talk you through some of the mental aspects that go into thinking that something like a wheel set might just make you ever so slightly more aerodynamic and fast-paced. Let's go check it out. Right, so I think it's important to first talk about these specific wheels. Now, the 1150mm carbon wheel set that I've got fitted to this bike, they're not entirely the most expensive wheels in the world. If you refer back to that blog post and video that I did about the wheels, you'll realize that they only cost $299 and I bought them from Walmart. So yes, not entirely the greatest spec sheet that comes with this particular wheel, and I think that is why I wanted to talk about the perceived mental benefits, because I think anybody out there who is coming from a wheel set that might be, you know, a couple of $1,000s worth, will look at the spec sheet like this and then also think, why on earth is he talking about a cheaper wheel, and how much of it is a true benefit that he receives from that particular wheel. So that is why we're going to talk about the possibility that it all comes down to being mental. Right, so I'm not going to claim to be some kind of a psychology expert on the topic of the placebo effect, but what I will do is I'm going to draw a bit on my background in finance and behavioral economics to talk about those behavioral aspects that make humans behave sometimes irrationally or just to perceive things in a different manner. And so that is some of the research that I'm going to draw on when I talk about this particular mental capacity for us to perceive things in a different way. Right, so if you're really interested in some of the things I'm going to talk about today, I do want to urge you, if you're looking for some good books to read, do add Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, as well as Richard Taller's Misbehaving, The Making of Behavioral Economics, to your reading list. Those are definitely books that's going to challenge you a little bit. They're not entirely the easiest books to read, and you're going to have to sort of go chapter by chapter to really let it sink in as you read along. Right, so those psychologists that I just referred to have done some incredible research over the years to try and help explain why people behave irrationally, or why they act or perceive things in a different way to what is expected. Now, that's what we're going to talk about today, and it all comes down to the behavioral heuristics. Now, before I lose you on that particular topic, stick with me on this one. I'm going to try and break down 3 behavioral heuristics that's going to help explain why I might perceive additional benefits from this carbon wheel set. Let's walk through them. I'm going to break it down into 3 key ones that I think play the biggest role, at least in my particular case. And people will be different. And so that's why I wanted to focus on 3 specific ones that I think plays into my factoring the most. Now, they're going to be recognition, availability, and anchoring. Alright, so before we get into those 3 specific examples of heuristics, maybe it's just worthwhile to back up for a second and talk about what exactly do we mean by heuristics, right? So, the human brain wants to, for the most part, be as efficient as possible, and that involves taking some shortcuts sometimes. Whenever it comes to complex questions, scenarios where there is maybe a bit more of an extensive reasoning process involved, the brain is going to come up with quick judgment calls, shortcuts, or sometimes referred to as cognitive biases, that allows us to just come to a decision so much quicker. So it's basically going to draw on past experiences, things that you've seen or have experienced, that will ultimately lead you to make a decision just so much quicker. Those shortcuts or cognitive biases are what we know as heuristics. Alright, so let's talk about that first heuristic, the recognition heuristic. So what this basically means is that the brain will rely on certain things that it can recognize. If a certain event or an occurrence can be recognized, then most likely you're going to assign a higher probability to that observation being true. So let's bring it back to a sporting example. So let's imagine 2 athletes are going to go head to head in a challenge. You know very little about the one particular athlete, but you know quite a lot, all the historical stats, every little background detail about the other athlete. Now, chances are you are going to assign a much higher probability to the athlete who you know about to win that particular challenge. And that's just the case of recognition. You know the name, and therefore you are going to assume that that athlete will be the better option. Now, in the same way, when we talk about these wheels, that same pattern of recognition really plays a role in our perceived benefits of what a wheel can do for you. So think of how many times you've seen a marketing ad that will make all these claims about the additional performance benefits that you get from a carbon wheel set. Now, that same ability to recognize benefits that come with a product is what then will assign, most likely, a higher degree of probability to your thinking that the wheels ultimately could lead to additional performance benefits. Pretty interesting. Our second heuristic deals with availability. Now, availability refers to the ease with which your brain can recall certain occurrences. So the easier it is for you to recall a particular memory, the higher the likelihood that you will assign a higher degree of probability for that occurrence to happen again. So when we break it down to our carbon wheel example, think of how many times you've seen a Tour de France rider win a particular stage, or a time trial while on board a carbon wheel set. Or if you're an Ironman athlete, how many times have an Ironman athlete gone on the fastest bike leg due to a carbon wheel set that they were riding? So that availability of information for you to draw from is what will then ultimately lead you to assign a higher probability to that particular event reoccurring. And that leads to a slight degree of bias whenever you are dealing with that particular topic. So yet again, another heuristic that might just lead to that perceived additional performance benefits that come with a carbon wheel set. The third and final heuristic that we are going to talk about is the anchoring heuristic. So what this essentially means is that your brain, in its search for a shortcut, if it doesn't know a particular variable, will kind of gravitate towards an anchor or pin it to a number that it does know. So let's bring it back to the wheel example. Now, I am going to overlay on my picture for you what the stock wheel set looks like for this particular bike, and then I'll also show you what the carbon wheel set looks like for this particular bike. So that means that I most likely, in my judgment calls, will anchor my decision as to how much quicker this wheel is when I compare it to the stock wheel set. So therefore I've already anchored my decision making. I think, it's just logical to say that it has to be at least as quick as the original wheel set that I took off of the bike. Then, along with anchoring comes adjustment. So what that means is that we will start with our reference point and then either adjust our expectations up or down. Now, again, going along that same decision making, I'll probably say, oh well, okay, it's a carbon wheel set, so it must be at least as quick and then maybe a little quicker than the original stock wheel set. So you can see how anchoring and then adjustment really factors into my decision making. Right, so if you've been listening along right now, then you'll probably want to correct me right now and say, but you can test these things. Why are you talking about all the psychological effects that might play into your decision making? You can slap a power meter to this bike and take it through a wind tunnel test, and we can talk about yaw angles and temperatures and rolling resistance and all those fancy things that factor into the real world model of why one wheel set might be faster or more aerodynamic than another. And that wasn't the purpose of this video. I think the manufacturers out there, they spend all the top dollars on getting that kind of research done. I wanted to share a little bit about why we think we might be going quicker on a particular bike. And you know what? Sometimes that thinking, that not knowing all the data, not having that hard data set, actually leaves the door open for that almost that ignorance is bliss kind of feeling, and that just allows the placebo effect to go so much stronger. So that's why I didn't want to go into all those specific things, but maybe through today's discussion you heard a few things that can help just color in some of the underlying thinking that goes into why we perceive sometimes whenever we fit something new to our bike or an extra piece of gear that we can just go that little bit quicker. And you know what? Maybe at the end of the day, that feeling of perceiving that you're going quicker can actually lead to enhanced performance benefits in itself. So that's my little thought process on some of the thinking that goes into why a cheaper, less expensive wheel set might at the end of the day make me look faster, which leads me to feel faster, and it might just very well at the end of the day help me go that little bit faster. So I hope you like this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe to this channel, and we'll be sure to be back in the future with more cycling and running related content here on Mountain Road Ride. I'm Vian. Until next time, See you then.